It was a dusty roadside diner where a group of bikers gathered for their usual ride. But this time, something was different. A little boy, no older than 9, stood trembling at the entrance. His eyes were swollen from crying, and his voice cracked with fear. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for food. Instead, he begged these tough, leather-clad strangers to do something unthinkable, end the life of the man waiting at home. His stepdad. What the bikers did next would not only shock the boy, but also leave everyone questioning the true meaning of justice. The boy's name was Daniel, and his story had been unfolding in silence long before he approached the bikers. Living in a small town, he was often seen wandering alone, bruises faintly visible beneath long sleeves, even in the summer heat. Neighbors whispered but rarely intervened. His mother, trapped in her own cycle of fear and dependence, had married a man who carried cruelty in his very presence. The stepdad, a towering figure with a sharp tongue and heavy hands, ruled the house with intimidation. At school, Daniel's teachers noticed his withdrawn behavior, his reluctance to speak, and his constant exhaustion. Yet every attempt to reach him seemed to end with Daniel insisting he was fine. Beneath those hollow reassurances lay a truth too dark for a child to carry. Nights filled with shouting, slammed doors, and the sting of fists that left both physical and invisible scars. On the day he encountered the bikers, Daniel had reached his breaking point. He had run out of hope, out of ways to escape. He thought if no adult could save him, maybe these fierce strangers could. The boy's plea wasn't born from hatred. It was born from desperation. And in his desperation, he unknowingly placed his fragile fate into the hands of men society often judged as dangerous themselves. What would they choose to do? The bikers had seen many things on the open road: bar fights, broken families, and plenty of people who wanted trouble. But never had they seen a boy so young, so desperate, asking for something so final. The leader of the group, a weathered man with tattoos crawling up his arms, crouched down to look Daniel in the eye. The child's words were shaky but determined, a mix of fear and courage. He wasn't asking for protection. He wanted his stepdad gone forever. As Daniel spoke, pieces of his story tumbled out. The stepdad's cruelty wasn't hidden. It was deliberate. Food withheld as punishment. Locked doors to keep him isolated. Nights when the sound of boots against the floor meant pain was coming. His mother's silent tears only added to his torment. And in that silence, Daniel believed he was utterly alone. The bikers exchanged glances, each man quietly grappling with the gravity of what they were hearing. To outsiders, they were men who thrived on rebellion, leather jackets, roaring engines, and a reputation that carried both fear and respect. But beneath the tough exterior, many carried scars of their own: broken childhoods, abusive homes, and struggles with identity in a society that often cast them aside. One biker, a tall man with a scar running across his cheek, clenched his fists as Daniel spoke. He remembered his own father's rage, the way the world turned blind eyes to a child's suffering. Another thought of his sister, trapped in an abusive marriage for years. For these men, Daniel's story wasn't just another tale of cruelty. It was a mirror reflecting battles they once fought. The group faced a choice: ignore the boy and ride on, or step into a fight that wasn't theirs. And though the boy had begged for death to come to his stepdad, the bikers knew that justice couldn't be served through violence alone. If they were to act, it had to be in a way that broke the cycle, not deepened it. Their engines roared as they followed Daniel home, not as executioners, but as protectors. Each mile brought them closer to a confrontation that would test not only their strength, but also their humanity. The house stood at the end of a cracked street, its paint peeling like the lives within. Daniel's stepdad was already outside, beer in hand, his stance arrogant and unbothered. But when the ground began to shake with the thunder of motorcycles, his expression faltered. One by one, the bikers pulled up, forming a wall of steel and leather in front of the boy's home. The stepdad sneered, shouting insults, mocking the sight of grown men arriving on bikes for a child. Yet the bikers didn't flinch. The leader dismounted, walking straight up to him, his silence heavier than any words. Behind him, the others stood tall, arms crossed, their presence enough to freeze the air. Daniel clung to the jacket of the nearest biker, his small body trembling, but for the first time, he felt the warmth of protection. His stepdad's bravado cracked under the weight of eyes that saw through him, not just as an abuser of a woman and child, but as a coward hiding behind fear and violence. The leader leaned in close, speaking words Daniel could not hear but would never forget the effect of. The stepdad's face drained of color, his fists unclenched, and for once, his booming voice was silent. The bikers didn't raise their hands. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was a verdict. Daniel would not suffer in silence anymore. That night changed everything. Daniel and his mother found themselves surrounded not just by bikers, but by a new sense of strength. The men ensured authorities were called, witnesses were gathered, and the cycle of silence was finally shattered. The stepdad, stripped of power, could no longer rule with fear. For Daniel, the image of those roaring bikes lined up outside his home became a symbol he would carry forever, not of violence, but of protection. He had begged for his stepdad's end, but what he received was something far greater, the beginning of freedom. The bikers rode away as quietly as they had arrived, leaving behind not just safety but a lesson. Justice isn't always about revenge. Sometimes it's about standing so firmly against cruelty that the abuser has no choice but to fall. Years later, Daniel would tell the story not as the boy who begged for death, but as the child who discovered unexpected heroes in the most unlikely of places. He learned that power doesn't always wear a badge or carry a gavel. Sometimes it wears leather and rides on two wheels. And for those who hear this story, a question lingers. How many Daniels live around us? Hidden behind closed doors, waiting for someone, anyone to notice? And when that moment comes, will we turn away or will we stand? Because sometimes, the loudest roar against injustice doesn't come from words at all. It comes from the engines of those willing to protect the voiceless.